So final touches to the building. We've used the blue to shadow those areas in the architecture. We've used it in the shadows carefully. We exploited that, as I put it, human scale of elements such as the windows. Note how we make some of the panes a little bit darker than others. It just gives that sort of illusion of, I suppose, of reflection in glass panes and so on. Again, judge this dots and dashes, just close observation. It's an impression. It's very much impressionistic, but I always feel that windows are the eyes of any building, and as I said, gives a nice sense of human scale, which we'll touch upon again in a few minutes. So there we have the sort of blues outlining the building. Next action on the building, I'm going to use that warm yellow ochre. There it is, that wash, and I'm just going to very gently brush over parts of the building in that. There it is, that yellow ochre, no deeper in colour than that, and you can see its effect over the cerulean blue, that blue that I've used in the building. You can see it's going to help darken. It's going to darken and warm, perhaps more depth. Using it so, just sparingly. Be careful. Do observation, just adding it against some of the blue shadows. Thus, just adding a little bit of warmth. This column here, in warmth too. Just warm that up. It's here also, and there. This back of the building and this apex too. Add it against the blue, it will darken the blue, so you can sort of really judge, but keep it very subtle. Essentially, the building's getting hit by a lot of light. We want to maintain that impression. I think it's there too. So, and it'll give it a bit of a warm glow. I think it does help. So that's essentially it. But we're using very much the white of the paper as an ally to its form. There we are. So finishing off now, couple of things. The dome, the top of that roof of that dome has, I suppose, a zinc type of covering, and it's got this sort of turquoise. I'm going to use a viridian green. This is the tricky one. You've got to distinguish it from the foliage. That green, nice clean brush. Let's just try a wash of that viridian across that dome on its shadow side. There we are. Surface. Something like that. Okay, so light and then shadow. Just spotting a few things here. We've got this tree's perhaps throwing a shadow on that slate. I gather that might be slate there. Let's use a little bit of tint of blue and violet again, just to pick up on some sort of dappled light shadows there. Who knows? Just lighten that. Maybe a bit bluer in tone. So we've got that impression too over that roof. So very close now. We're quite close to the finish of that middle ground. Really been quite important, hasn't it? And one last thing before we move on to the last third of our painting is you'll notice here I'm using white pigment. This is a white as a pigment. It's quite heavy on the brush, quite thick on the brush. Look, you know, it's quite opaque, quite heavy pigment. And you notice I've just started to dot underpaint some figures. You see, look, think you don't have to, but I quite like the human scale. This is the regatta. It's a busy afternoon of racing, and we're going to have some figures here. There's an awning here, and beneath here are chairs, and there's going to be other figures. There's going to be dots and dashes of colours as people enjoy their cork their champagne bottles and celebrate their racing. So just another little technique of underpainting with white at this stage, and let's come back to these figures later and see how we actually describe them. So now we're nearly there, everyone. Let's get this water and the foreground completed with the rowers. Not much more to do, believe it or not. We've created the scene. Now let's get all the activity. We've been looking forward to this part, the finale. So let's get started. So a couple of things. Now what we could exploit here, some watercolours, is this type of material, this rubber glue, which is called a masking fluid, and we can apply it. I quite often use the back of the brush, and I've got some details here in the water, and I can use an old brush also in areas, and what that's about, it's going to mask out the paper and leave it pristine white when we put a great wash across it. Now some of us won't have this, so don't panic. Something I favour and use quite often is candle wax. Candle wax is a resist, and I'm going to just put some striations here in the water. You can sort of use this in the same way because it resists the water, the colour, and so leaves the paper white. And it's a little bit more arbitrary, and you get sort of quite nice effects in water as well as skies. Do try that at some point. Just a thing about the water, remember the mark making has to be flat. Any reflections are flat. Water is flat. There's other elements in the composition which are angles because of laws of perspective, but remember, keep all the reflections and qualities of the refractions in water and striations flat to that. So just remember this. So good. We're ready now for the start of that water. I'm going to use a really strong colour. So we could use again that cerulean. We've used it before. I'm going to use a real emerald, viridian, as I'm using viridian green also. And let's start. Let's get a good positive wash in. Here it goes. We've got. We'll start here at the background. Across it comes, and you've got to just, as we were before with a little earlier on with the sky, be really positive. Go across this wash. It's got to have a fast sort of action. We want that sort of spontaneity. We want that sort of flick and liveliness of the brush mark making and mark making. Remember, foreground always darker. Always a darker wash foreground. A little bit more colour. Look at that. And this is really going to play now towards exploit our concept of this work. Lots of blues and greens so far, but remember there's going to be some really nice warm hot colours arriving shortly, and this all really sets all that off. So you can see where some of the masking fluid is. Whether it's right or wrong doesn't matter at this stage. We can always paint over it. So this wash, really important now. Really going to start tying things up. I've left a little gap there. That's the bank. That needs another sort of a sense of attention later as detail. But really now we're finishing. We're going towards finish now. So I'm going to use some of this viridian also, and really begin to set the scene for the craft, the boats. So we can see, and I've got my blotter. You've got a blotter with it just in case you go a little bit heavy in places, or you feel it's too much pigment colour. making sure of this foreground stage. There it is. Okay, let's see. Very nice, very nice. That's our Thames beginning to set. So just used a hairdryer just to speed things up a little bit. If you're in studio, you can use that to help dry large washes, areas as that. And now an eraser, as it's dry eraser, I'm just going to take off now the that masking fluid, those areas where I use masking fluid. If you haven't used masking fluid because you haven't got it or anything, don't worry. We can find ways through with that. I'll mention that again. But look how the wax has been used and exploited. It makes these rather nice, realistic sort of impressions in water. So do think about that. You can find some candle wax somewhere in the back of a cupboard. Give it a try. So next stage, everyone, I have to take out these boys too. I'm going to look at the next large shapes, which are the hulls of these boats, and I've got a really strong, vivid yellow mixed there. Both boats are yellow in colour. Let's put that down straight away. Something like that. There it goes. And we can cut into that in a little while. But let's. It's important just to get these large washes in. There they are. Just looking at it in relation to some of the other yellows in the pictures, the first time I see them. Something like that. Yeah, let's just let that settle. That's the side of the hulls. There's a lighter version of that, more lemony, which is the top of that. When it hits the light. Have a look at that again in a moment, but that sets the scene, I think, there. And whilst that's drying, speaking of yellow, let's get back up to this the bank here. This yellow now a little bit tempered and a bit lighter. I might just use a bit of yellow ochre there too, that warmer yellow. And there's a sense of play here, a sort of reflection. There's a definite influence of reflection of bank and, dare I say, foliage in the water here. Do we see? So that's going to separate that a little bit. And notice the sort of speed of working now. We have, I feel, done the work now. This should be quite fluid and quite spontaneous. Keep the spontaneity in the marks and expression of that sort of dappled light. So I'm just starting to sort of show a bit of reflection here, furthest bank, further around this corner. I see it. Good. So we're starting now to set the whole picture together. A little bit of ochre I noticed required in just at the top of this bank. Quite a heavy mix there. Let's just lighten that. And that sort of goes through. That's a sort of, just take that through like that. Good. Okay, so there, some warmer colours which we definitely require, because we've got all these blues and greens, and look, enjoy this. We could almost spontaneously, if I could prepare as a very thin, small, round brush, a pointer, the first dash of a bright yellow. I've got a cadmium red here, and what's that going to be for? Well, look, let's just note its potential in this work. I'm going to use it here for these little boys. Markers and so on in the water. Anything like this we can exploit that gives us an optical sense of the space that we're evolving here in the work.